second day of strategic planning between the Richfield City Council and our department heads, and it is Thursday, March 24th, and I'll pass it over to Craig.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, welcome back, everybody. We are on day 2 of our strategic planning retreat. And before I get into the specifics of today and how we will conduct today's process, I think it's a good idea and necessary to recap and to discuss where we were yesterday and any issues that we have. I'll say by way of teeing this up that I received a couple of emails late last night from a couple of council members expressing confusion and concern about the process, and I answered those, but I think it would be, something's going on with my computer. But I thought it would be important for us to address that now so that there is no confusion going into the busy day that we have ahead of us. I'll let the two council members speak for themselves in a moment, but I just want to recap and explain my position on where we are, what we're doing, and what we're about to try to achieve today. So this is a strategic planning process. And as I mentioned yesterday in the lead up to the work we were doing at the end, the strategic plan is not an operating plan. It's a strategy. You're setting, you, city council supported by senior staff, are setting the strategic direction for the next 3 years. Specifically, that means that you're taking all the information that you've gathered the last couple of months from the community, from the environmental scan, and from your own SWOT analysis. You're mixing that all up and processing that to identify the most important priorities, which are on the screen in front of you. We talked at length about that yesterday. So again, this is 30,000, 60,000 feet, pick your elevation, view of what's important in the city of Richfield. And as a leadership group, you need to be there. You need to say clearly and concisely to the organization and to the community, here's what's important. These 5 areas are what we're going to focus on and focus all of our effort on, or at least direct our time and resources in these directions. This doesn't mean that you're not going to patrol the streets, fill potholes, fight fires, pay bills, do all the things that you normally do. You're going to continue to do that. But this will guide you and direct you and may change, in fact, it will change operations because you're saying things like aging infrastructure needs to be addressed. Kristen will eventually have some operational change or refocusing depending on what comes out of your work today. Similarly to community development, depending on what you say will be the outcomes within that, whether that's housing, economic development, some kind of redevelopment, that will set the tone and set the guidance system for an operational response. The concerns that were expressed to me last night were that, we've got some operational concerns that we want to make sure get articulated, and also who sets these priorities. Is it staff or is it the council? And the concern is the council should be setting this, and the staff talked a lot last night. The goal of a retreat like this is that this is a collaborative endeavor between the council and the senior management team. Clearly, the council is the decision-making authority here, but during an event like this, and again, subject to what you want, you meaning the council want to have happen, you put together a collaborative discussion structure that will lead to a final determination, which will be approved by the city council. So if there's either too much input by the council, by the staff, or if it feels like it's too staff directed, it's incumbent on the council members in the moment during the process to say that, or to say, I have a priority that I'd like to lay on the table, or I need to get some of my concerns recognized, and we haven't recognized them. I can't read anyone's mind, and I can't deal with things that aren't on the table. So I need everyone to be vigorous and forward thinking here, and raising your hand or doing whatever you need to do. I thought that we had a pretty good conversation yesterday, and that folks got their ideas and their issues out on the table. But if that's not the case, we have a little bit of time at the beginning here, not an unending amount of time, but we have a little bit of time where we can process that and find out where we are and what needs to happen. But we do have a really full morning today, and I don't want to take away from that hard work that we have to do. But with that in mind, I do want to open it up and make sure that the group has an opportunity to express any unresolved issues, or make sure that we're leading into what we're about to do with a clear conscience. So with that, I'll open it up, and whoever wants to jump in and express their concerns, now would be the time. Go ahead, Simon.
Craig, I'll jump in and I'll express. So I'm not sure what other council members have expressed a concern about. I just want to say very clearly, it was not that staff was talking too much. So I just want to be like hyper clear on that. If anything, like more conversation with staff is better, not less. I think what I was not clear on, because I felt like yesterday was also, I agree with you, really good, really fruitful, very global on things that would maybe apply to all departments or the whole city, where we have, in terms of strategic visions, strategic priorities for public transportation may or may not overlap with public safety or liquor. And so those, not that we're driving the tactical execution in any of those departments, but I didn't have clarity on what our agenda was today, other than we're going to talk about things from department to department, but I don't know what that looked like. So I just sent an email saying, I don't understand the agenda and we're doing something large and substantive. So clarity with regards to that would be really helpful, but not that, certainly that we don't want to hear from, or I don't want to hear from staff. I want exactly the opposite of that. And so I'm grateful for the process, glad to just say that clearly in front of everybody. So just maybe
Good.
With an agenda for today, how we're getting there, the process for that, I think would give me a lot of clarity.
Okay, yeah, and we're about to do that. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
And I'll I'll go ahead and share too. I was the other one who expressed, and I would also say that I did not mean to simplify it to staff spoke too much, but that I felt toward the end I did clearly state that I was wanting to hear from the other council members, and the next two people who spoke were Craig and Katie, who are the ones I talked to in this. And specifically toward the very end, I know we were running out of time, but I know Mary and Maria spoke up a few times, but other than I think a thumbs up in the chat from Simon, I don't know that Simon or Sean got a chance to get a word in the last 10-15 minutes. And similar to how the next step of this process, as I understand it, is entirely staff, because it's the implementation, what does this look like, piece that council should not be part of, or should be like giving broad feedback rather than getting in the weeds. It just felt like we were not clear on who was making the decisions about which of these things. I don't think we would have ended with a vastly different set of 5 things, or 4 or 6, but it just felt off at the end that there was not more of a chance for council to just talk to each other and see if this final version was truly what we want to go with.
Okay. Go ahead, Sean.
So I apologize for not speaking up more yesterday. I was a little bit weary at the end of the day, but today I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So my only issue wasn't so much how we arrived at the priorities, just the problem statement of the reason why we're doing this process, as Katie has described it to me, and I think to everyone, is there's just like an undefined list of priorities. The goal is to really whittle it down to something that's clear and specific and we can act on. So I was kind of confused in this process where it was like we started with something specific and then we kept making it more and more and more broad. And I don't know how that actually will inform the rest of the process. Like, for example, we started with housing. We needed to say housing and development, and we expanded it to community development. Other things we expanded to broad, like I think operational excellence is always going to be a priority of every city, or I would assume that. So I guess I'm just not sure how this informs the next step in our process and how we'll get more specific and get actionable for staff from this point.
Okay. So maybe unless anyone else has a comment, I think it would help if I jumped in and started talking about where we are, what we're going to do, and how this works, because I think that'll answer the questions that you have raised and the concerns that you have. And let me just say, to start out with, even with my clients that have had lots of years of experience together as a group doing strategic planning over many cycles, when I come in with my approach, it's a new approach, it's a little different, and everyone has a certain level of confusion because it's new and different. At the end of the day, the process is meant to be straightforward and simple insofar as it segregates the responsibilities and it focuses on measurement. So let me explain what I mean by that. I'm just going to reinforce that one more time. We're trying to make sure that this group, meaning the broad leadership group of the city, stays at what I would call a policy level, a direction level. And that means large buckets like the 5 that are in front of you are the bucketed areas, the themes, the strategic focus areas for the next 3 years. We make them broad so that, for example, within sustainable infrastructure or community development, you can accommodate a range of issues that are encompassed there. So in in sustainable infrastructure, water, sewer, streets, buildings, climate, all are encompassed. When you get into the next step, you'll look at that basket of things and say, all right, for the next 3 years, what is the imperative? What must we, or do we want to or choose to focus on? And then you're going to debate that and figure that out. Similar to community development, there was a lot of conversation yesterday. Do we call out housing separately? Do we call out economic development separately? We decided collaboratively, I thought, to say community development so that today you can talk about the fact that is housing the most important, or is economic development the most important? You can talk about that. You can debate that today. You can figure that out. It's enough of an umbrella term so that you can still have vigorous arguments and debate about that and come to a conclusion. Everything that you're doing demands that you make a choice one way or the other. Maybe housing is more important this cycle, or maybe it's economic development that's more important this cycle. At some level, you have to decide, and that level is today. The way the process will work is a small group will focus on it, and the small group will focus on it, and then the full group will finalize it and bless it at the end of the day. And I'll walk through how that process works in just a second. But I wanted to make sure that we're all on board with that idea and how that works. In fact, I'm going to do a couple of things first, just to make sure that we're all comfortable with that. We need to define what's included in these 5 areas. And so I want to give the group a chance to make sure that we don't leave something out. I did a starter list for sustainable infrastructure to include streets, utilities, stormwater, buildings, climate impacts. Is there anything else that needs to be thrown into this large bucket? Is that a pretty good list, Mary?
I just want to clarify, those are all external things. Are you going to come back to some of the internal stuff like IT later?
I think we decided yesterday, if I'm remembering this correctly, that IT or technology is in the operational excellence bucket. And if a staff person, Katie or someone can help me out, is that what we agreed? I'm okay leaving it in here, but I see Kristen nodding her head, so, yep. Good idea. Parks too. Parks should probably be in here as well, right? Katie?
Yeah, and we talked about financing all of that stuff.
Finance, yeah, when we get to, I'll do the operational
Yep.
excellence, but in terms of infrastructure, the technology infrastructure was going to be in that bucket, not in this bucket.
I
So this
think
is-
though, to Katie's point, this bucket is going to also need financial conversations.
Okay.
I mean, I just wanted to jump into just in terms of our goals for the day and understanding more clearly what our goals for the day are. And like I think you mentioned, Craig, it's a lot to accomplish in the next 4 hours to break down, do this work in small groups and come back and say we're on board with everything. Feels like I think that would be amazing. I also think if we didn't get through everything, it wouldn't be failure, but it might just be too much. And so and maybe it's not, and maybe I still don't understand the process quite clearly, but
yeah,
I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, let me do this. I want to get through, I promise I will walk through step by step what you're going to do, but I need to get this list accomplished. So bear with me. On the community development group, I put economic development, tax base expansion, redevelopment, housing, which includes affordability, maintenance, density, neighborhood stability and change. Anything else in this group?
Accessibility in the housing part.
Okay, anything else? Is that a good list? I'm gonna keep rolling.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I would just add in community development, I think a long-term or intermediate over the next 3 years strategic goal. We've had a good amount of friction, and it's always because it's just a tough department with community and staff and the planning commission and staff and sometimes with council, and just having as a strategic goal, I think it would be valuable to have a goal that we would strategically think about how we can build stronger ties and communication and bridges, and I would advocate for that to be part of our planning.
Okay. About equity and inclusion, the only thing I wrote down here was city staff diversity and kind of community dynamics. It probably needs to be fleshed out a bit more. Maria?
I really liked a comment that Ben shared yesterday, and I thought that would be good framing for this equity and inclusion, making sure that we have metrics and measures that specifically show the impact that our equity and inclusion efforts are having directly on our community members.
Yep. Okay, great. And again, this was both an internal and an external. It includes internal and external efforts, right? That was what I was trying to convey here. Maria?
Sorry, I should have just finished this. This might, I don't know if this is, I think it's related to the first one, but the way that I think about equity and inclusion is not about changing what we do, which is the delivery of core services, but how we do it. So how, like, being very clear in articulating how equity and inclusion is being taken into account and focused on within the delivery of our core services.
Mm-hmm.
Maria, I think you said it better than I was going to. I was going to say embedding it into our decision making and our service delivery.
Yesterday, accessibility came up as well under this one.
This is becoming a very big bucket, of course, but the other thing we talked about was the multilingual engagement across cultures. So that
Yeah,
piece
and let me be, it's not a huge bucket. Let me just tell you what this is. What I'm doing here with all of these, I'm just saying that this is just helping you define the parameters for this. It isn't, these aren't goals, these aren't objectives, they aren't anything. It's just when you're thinking about this, make sure that you're thinking about these concepts or these definitions. That's really all we're trying to do now, is give you some guidance so you don't go outside the boundaries. Operational excellence, this is operations of various departments, your standard operations. It's continuous improvement, it's financial management, it's technology. That was pretty straightforward, I think. If there's anything else I'm missing, let me know, but I think that was it.
Is staffing included here?
No, that's speaking of that, that's in this one.
Oh, there we go. Okay, thanks.
Workforce capacity, training, succession, retention, attraction.
I think if someone had said long-term planning, if we want that, would fit into the previous one.
Yeah, good catch. Yep,
And
absolutely.
with that kind of like looking at what are long-term risks so we can mitigate them. So risk management.
Okay, yep. Okay, I think we're good. So what I want to describe to you now is what you're going to do. So we're going to put people into breakout groups, and we're going to do those assignments in a minute, but I'm going to walk you through what I want you to understand about the next piece. But let me just, again, want to be completely clear, and I take Simon's comment seriously. You have a lot to accomplish in a short period of time, and you'll get as far as you get. But the goal here is to give each small group essentially an hour and a half to work out what I'm about to describe. We'll take a break once that's completed, and then everyone will reconvene as a large group, and then each small group, with my assistance, will present what they developed to the larger group, and then we'll collectively say, all right, that makes sense, or, you know, I don't understand, or I don't like that, or I disagree. We'll reconcile what work product comes out of the group. All right, so let me walk you through. I will describe the process, and in each small group there will be a subject. All right. Each small group will have a subject matter expert. So for example, in the sustainable infrastructure, Kristen and Amy will be the staff folks, the subject matter folks that you can count on. But we will have a council member or members assigned to that group as well. So we want to have both policy and staff conversation around developing these ideas so that you have a good and rigorous debate about that. But the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to say, what are within that area, so let's just use sustainable infrastructure since I brought it up. What are the 3 most important outcomes in the next 3 years in that area that need to be achieved? And again, you'll get a copy of that slide where we just listed all the things that are included in that bucket. So I want you to simply sit there and brainstorm and talk about what is on the horizon, or what are the things that are on your agenda, or what is it that you've seen in the community. I just want you to sort of talk through and make notes and essentially do a brainstorming exercise. I don't want you to come to too many conclusions in the first 5 minutes. I want you to have a rigorous conversation about that. That's why we have both policy and subject matter expertise at the table. You'll do that. That's step one. And you'll ask yourself, what are you seeking to achieve and what does success look like? The second thing that you're going to do, if I can get this slide to move, is you're going to say, how would we measure that? What would a good measure for that be? Oops, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical. Speaking of technical problems, everybody, what would a good measurement be? It has to be a realistic target, but it should be a stretch target. And it has to have direct relationship to that outcome. So let's just assume, for the sake of argument, we say that sustainable infrastructure is a thing we're dealing with. And one of the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve is we want a reliable utility system. That's a broad outcome, that's one of the outcomes we want. How would we measure that? Well, we might measure that by breaks and backups, because we've been having a lot of breaks and a lot of backups, and we can't tolerate that. Our citizens are complaining. It's a horrible system. Then the target would be to reduce breaks and backups over the next 3 years by 30%. And how would we measure that? Well, we would measure that, an indicator of that. So it'll also be indicators. What would we be tracking? What would we be counting? What would we be measuring? We would be doing we'd do monthly reports in the water and sanitary sewer systems on our breaks and our backups, and how did we reconcile those, and what's the distribution across the community, what is it by district, all of those kinds of things. What you're setting up here is you're setting yourself up for measurement success and targeted staff implementation. So let me show you exactly how this works in practice. I'll give you 2 examples. These come from other communities, but I'm hoping, and we're giving you these examples. You'll have these in your small group. So in this community, financial sustainability was the priority. First outcome was they wanted an adequate fund balance. Another outcome was they wanted improved cost recovery from their fee-based services. And the third thing they wanted was less reliance on tax revenues in the general fund. Now, the first thing you're going to notice about this is these seem like big buckets as well. And they are. They're big outcomes. They are outcomes you're seeking to achieve. This particular community did not have an adequate fund balance. They wanted an adequate fund balance. They were very dissatisfied about their cost recovery from their fee-based services, and that needed to change. And they were very reliant on tax revenues, and they wanted to diversify their tax base so that they had less reliance on property taxes. So what were they going to do? They were going to track and trend year-end fund balances and any budget surpluses. They were going to trend and track changes in their cost recovery ratio, the direct and indirect fee-based costs that they brought in, and they were going to make sure that they were monitoring their tax and non-tax ratio changes and any increase in revenue types. Why? Because what they're shooting for in fund balance is to hit a fund balance target of 35%, and they wanted to do it by a certain specific date. So right here, what you're looking for is adequate fund balance, and the way to measure that is we want it at 35% by a date certain. What does cost recovery improvement mean? We want to improve from 44% to 60% by this date. Again, improved cost recovery is the outcome, a very specific measurable target by a very specific date. Less reliance on tax revenues. How would we measure that? 10% increase in non-tax revenues over the 3-year fiscal period shown here. It's not rocket science. Now, financial sustainability happens to be one of those categories where quantitative measurement is pretty easy because you're tracking financial data and you have things that tee up well for that. Let's try another one. Economic development. Most communities have something like this. The 3 outcomes in this particular community, they wanted a vibrant downtown, they wanted a growing tax base, and they wanted quality job growth. Now, again, I point to the fact that This is pretty typical of a community, and it also seems pretty broad, but how would you measure that, and what would you track? Well, in this case, they're tracking retail vacancies and net new retailers. They're tracking for tax base, net market value on new investment, not anything else. It's a sign of growth. And quality job growth, they defined it in this community as new jobs that pay above the city median. So it's not entry-level jobs or minimum wage jobs. Quality job growth is new jobs paying above the city median. So how would we measure our success for vibrancy in downtown? A 15% decrease in vacancies over the period January 2018 to December 2020. How would we measure success in growing our tax base? $20 million increase in new investment over this period of time. And how would we measure success in quality job growth? 200 new jobs that pay above the city median between these dates specifically. So what you'll be doing is you'll be starting, and this isn't yours, this is just an example. You'll be starting with a set of strategic priorities. In your small group, you'll be defining outcomes. You'll be identifying the indicators, and you'll be setting the targets. This is the work of today's group. By having these in place, it will set the table, at least in draft form, for the staff to get together in a few weeks, and we'll be working with them to put very specific initiatives and action plans together that will help to achieve that, and that goes in this final column. So you saw this yesterday, and you are all either you've been given it or you will be given it shortly, this one-page summary from another community that shows in detail what this looks like. You can use this in your small groups as a reference point, and you can use it for inspiration, or in fact stealing if it makes sense to do that. The point is that we want to set you up for success in your small groups. Corey and I will be coming in and out of the breakout groups that are being set up here. And what we got to do in order to get those breakout groups to work is assign each of you to a breakout group. So we've got staff assignments in each one, but we need to have counsel assigned to each group. Go ahead, Ben.
Two clarifying questions. One, it looks like here, obviously we wouldn't want to do this to every outcome, but it's fine. There are some outcomes that will have multiple indicators and targets.
Yeah, and in fact, let me describe to you what I would prefer. Let me go back. What I would prefer the group to do is the following. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, you can have multiple targets. One target is preferable, but if it makes sense to have a couple, that's all right. The indicators, there might be a variety of indicators, but to make this simple for you, the way I strongly urge you to do this is sit down with your group and don't even think about indicators or targets. Think first about what are the three most important things. Once you get those articulated clearly and you agree with the three outcomes, the second thing you should do is go directly to the targets and say, all right, if I think these are the important outcomes, what would be the way to measure that? And the measurement means how do I, some kind of quantification by some sort of date certain. So it would be $100 improvement by the end of the year, or a 50% change by the end of 3 years, something like a quantification that says that you've been successful, okay? So I will tell you that in some of these, it may be a qualitative change rather than a quantitative change. So it may be that you end up doing a survey that says we've improved the acceptance by the community from 50% acceptance to 80% acceptance. Now, you may not even know what that is right now. So it may be from blank to blank, And one of the things that you do in the first year is go out and do a survey, and then you come back in subsequent years and do follow-up surveys to see if you've made an impact on that particular thing. Does that, you follow on that one? Okay, all right. So that's what we want you to do. The question now becomes one of who's going to go to which group. And as I said, we did assign, I didn't go back far enough. We did assign staff to this, but we haven't assigned council. So Katie and Maria.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Katie, I don't know what you think, but I would prefer if council pick what one they go to, because I know that specific councils have a lot of interest in kind of helping outline targets and things for specific departments. I'd prefer that if they are in those working groups, if they can pick. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, let's see if we can get to consensus. Do you all have ideas about which ones that you want to go to?
My greatest interest would be community development, but if somebody else is fighting for that, sustainable infrastructure would also be okay.
Okay.
I would go to either of those or equity.
I'm sorry, who said that just now? I was looking
Ben.
down. Ben? Okay. All right.
So it sounds like those are kind of spoken for. I'm happy with either operational excellence or workforce capacity, so we spread the council around.
Okay, Mary, I put you on operational excellence. Sean, I put you on community development. Ben, I put you on sustainable infrastructure. So we have workforce and equity.
Okay.
I could do either.
Okay, Ben, I feel like you should be on equity, but I don't want to make the decision for you either.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
All right, so let's do that. All right, Ben, I'm putting you there. All right. So who's going to go in? So we have sustainable infrastructure and workforce right now.
You pick
I would choose workforce.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm
All right.
infrastructure, which, to be honest, that's the one I'm most interested in. Anyways.
Hey, everybody wins. All right, that's very good. Chris is populating these now. Is that correct, Chris?
That is correct.
All right.
Craig, can I ask one more question before we jump in?
No, absolutely.
This is maybe a recurring question, but before we break into this, can you help me understand, or maybe this needs to be a staff question, where the line is if something is not in the plan, where the line is between what is like normal operations that will continue and what is like, we won't do this for 3 years? Because for example, something like, I mean, now it is in the plan, but like the equity toolkit was like already in motion. If we hadn't made it a bucket, and I guess I don't know if the toolkit will make one of these outcomes, like would that continue or would that be deemed no longer a priority and put on the back burner for 3 years?
Before Katie answers, let me jump in and then she can fill in additionally. One of the things that I failed to say is that you have 5 priorities and you're going to have up to 3 outcomes. So for example, if you decide that you only want 2 outcomes in there and you really are struggling to get a third, that's okay. But 3 is typical. But that still means you have 15 big things you're trying to accomplish, right? I am all about you looking at what's in front of you that you already know that you either have to do and it's a big thing or it's an impactful thing. So declare victory and include it as a thing. All right. Now, the struggle that you're going to have, and I guarantee that it will be a struggle, and that's why Corey and I are going to help you in small groups. You're going to want to focus on tactics and implementation as opposed to outcomes. Remember that what you're doing is you're establishing 3 outcomes. That means it's the after effect. It's What have we achieved? We have achieved this. We have created a vibrant downtown. We have created quality jobs. That's the outcome we're seeking. It's not the tactic, or it's not the action or initiative. So part of what you're going to be doing. So if, for example, if the toolkit is already being worked on, maybe that's in service of ensuring a more equitable workforce, or it's in service of some other outcome that you're seeking to achieve. That's what you should be discussing within your small group is that a thing that's happening? And if it's in service of it, what is it in service of? Okay. All right. Go ahead, Katie.
So, because we have limited resources and that's a new project and it is going to take time, and I think it's important to measure its impact. And so I would categorize it as ups and extras at this point. I think eventually it'll be, like snow plowing or, doing the annual audit. But right now it is very much still a new project that we're rolling out and additional work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess another concrete example, what does that mean for, like, I know fire has talked about the community, paramedics, police have talked about this co-responder stuff. Both of those are new directions. If that's not named here somewhere, does that still happen, or does that not happen?
I mean, I think that those are conversations to come. So depending on what gets developed here and what the council direction is and what these three priorities are that come underneath the big priority buckets, we've only got so much time and money. And so then we have to look at it and say, can we realistically get that done in the next 3 years? So sometimes, yes, it may get dropped.
So let's talk concretely. And I'm saying this and I'm taking time because I think this will help everyone. So let's use equity and inclusion just as an example here, right? So you may have an outcome that may seem super broad, but let's say the outcome is a welcoming community, or a community where trust is, flourishing, or something like that. And the way you'd measure that is that the trust index that has moved from X to Y, or something like that. Well, you don't have a trust index. Well, maybe that's one of the things that you develop over the period of time. And then maybe in the next cycle, it's still an outcome because you're still working on all the implements to build trust in the community so that your trust index moves up. Or maybe you want a workforce that is reflective of the diversity in your community, and that's the outcome that you're seeking. That may be an ongoing 10-year process to diversify your workforce to the point where you're actually reflecting the diversity of the community. The point is, that's your aspirational outcome. And in the current year, you want to move the needle from this dynamic to that dynamic. And then it gives the staff the direction to say, what are the projects and programs that you're going to work on to make all of that happen? This is the most uncomfortable part of this part of the process, is that we all, including me, naturally want to go to the doing part as opposed to creating the outcome part and how we're going to measure the outcome. Okay. And if you can stay there, that'll help. Katie?
Yeah, can I ask this in the chat because I didn't want to interrupt your introduction of what we're doing today, but we talked about diversity and for our staff, and that might not become one of the three under either, but I just want to make sure, did folks want to include that more in the equity, or do they want to include it in the workforce? Because we talked about it in both bucket areas. My memory is that we did.
Yeah, it's important to get that straight first. Staff, what do you think about that? Or council, doesn't matter, but go ahead.
I guess I would just say it kind of is in everything. So in the fire department, for example, just by using the equity toolkit, 2 of my last 4 hires would fall into non-white male categories, right? And it wasn't that we changed, we still hired the best people for the job. We just used the toolkit to take away some of the barriers that we normally would see in a hiring process. So I think it kind of touches a lot of things throughout our priorities. I would hate to say it's in any one group. I think it's just part of the worldview that we all share right now, and I don't know that we can take it out of that.
So Krista, can we hear from you on your perspective on because as HR manager?
Yeah, I would say my preference is to include it in workforce capacity, just because I think we can have some really, and obviously I'm already going to this tendency, right, Craig, where I'm looking at the targets and I'm looking at how we're going to measure it. But I think that will be the clearest way for us to really define it. And then I think we could include something in equity and inclusion about making sure that we have a workforce that supports our very diverse or BIPOC staff, or continues to develop or provides a welcoming environment, or provides training in different areas of equity and inclusion, so that our supervisors are more well equipped to supervise our BIPOC staff that we're hiring. So I think if we include it in workforce capacity, that makes a little bit more sense for me from an HR perspective, but open to hear if others have feedback too.
Craig, I don't think there's any arms raised. How distinct do these items need to be? Because I could see, some aspects being we want to focus on the financial part of this, but also having finance, and operational effectiveness or something else. I feel like we do have an opportunity to kind of include that in both of these buckets.
Right. When I think of operational excellence and finance, to me, that's about how are we do we need to improve, or do we need to address our financial management capabilities or systems, okay? And if I'm thinking about it in terms of sustainable infrastructure, I would say that it's about having a funded plan for long-term asset management or long-term capital, resources or something like that. So those are two different things. It would be, operational excellence. It may be about looking at diversifying your revenue base, and for infrastructure, it's about how are we going to do how are we going to have rate support for utility expansion or things like that. So it's very much in support of that category as opposed to a broad-based financial management piece. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Katie, but that's how I see it.
Yes.
Okay. Simon, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question kind of in a similar vein, but different, as we identify outcomes and just understanding how they sit between different departments and in the buckets that they sit in. For example, public safety, not unique to Richfield, but regionally, nationally, we see crime increasing. That do we make goals that are oriented specifically towards the departments in these? Goals or outcomes that, or we have the priorities, but how does that fit? How do the generally department specific goals fit into the conversations that we're having in these different buckets? Could you just walk me through, as an example, how do we?
Let me give you two reactions to that specific thing, and I'll explain how it fits into this framework. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, I'm not saying that it is an issue, but let's assume for the sake of argument. So stay calm, Jay, stay calm.
Yes.
I wanna talk about, let's say that crime or safety was a gigantic issue and everybody was talking about it, and it was a focus of all the details and all the information that we had brought in, okay? If that was the case, then a safe city might be one of the buckets, right? And that safe city concept might have all the things that relate both to public safety, but it might also be safe streets. It may also be about, houses that are deteriorated. It may be a bunch of things that relate to safety in your community, but that's how you would get operational relative to that. Now, how would you do it? Since that's not a big issue, or it didn't raise itself to the level of being a bucket. The way that all of the departments relate are under the operational excellence. So are we, what are we doing in terms of continuous improvement? What are we doing relative to technology? Do we have technology leveraging the delivery of services? Maybe that's body cams. Maybe that's license plate detectors. There are things in police that could be doing, but it could also be how are we doing our processing of our bills in our finance department, and what are we doing for continuous improvement? So those are the kinds of things where we would target. Maybe we would say there are going to be 2 pilot projects throughout the organization for process improvement over the next 3 years, because we want to continue to get better at what we do. And internally, Katie and her team will prioritize the greatest need and the amount of dollars that they have available for that process improvement. Maybe it's police, maybe it's public works, maybe it's finance, maybe it's community development. That'll be an internal decision. What you should say is, we want to continue to ramp up our excellence, and we need continual process improvement. Or, for example, workforce capacity. It's going to touch every department, because I'm hearing people's hair is on fire, and so we've got to deal with that. I don't know if that's sufficient to where you're going, but again, I think it's that tension.
I think it's the opposite. Or I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think it's the tension between, we want to see operational changes, but this isn't the venue to meet to define operational changes. It's more broad than that.
No, thank you.
Yep. All right. We want you to get to your rooms, and we want to give you time, but Mary has had her hand up, so I want to give her one last question. Oh, you're muted, Mary.
I do that all the time. Very quickly, it was mentioned previously that part of the strategic planning was going to help us deal with, like, if a new idea bubbles up in the community. So what happens, say, like we had this work session on flavored tobacco. If something comes up that's not specific on here, is it still handled through various departments, or how is that handled?
So this would be a good opportunity. So we didn't talk about that yesterday, but I think that could flow into the operational excellence bucket under a governance outcome. So you want an efficient governing system, let's say. That's the outcome you want. And so the way you would measure that is that maybe you get agreement on 70% of the issues that come up or something. I don't want to predetermine that, but I think it goes in that bucket, and you should have a robust discussion about whether governance is an important outcome for that. Because if you think your governance and leadership and decision-making process is important to focus on in the next few years, then I would put that in there. Again, I don't want to predetermine it or tell you what to do, but I think it fits there. Okay. Chris, what do we do next?
I think I can send everyone to the breakout sessions. Craig, we still want an hour and a half, correct?
Yeah, time check, it's 9:30 or almost 9:30. So here's what I'll do. Let's see where I'm going to give you an hour, okay? And we're going to come in and out. I think you can do this in an hour, but the way it's going to work is if it takes longer than that, we'll see. The department head, there's been an assigned department head or staff person to take notes. Your work product will be transferred to a one sheet that'll have the 3 outcomes, the 3 targets, and the associated indicators. That'll be sent to me once you're finished, and then I will put that on the screen, and then the group will present that to the larger group when we reconvene. We'll take a break after you're finished. And so I'm anticipating that roughly, I think are we breaking at, what is our end time today? Katie, can you help me with that, or 12:30? I'm hopeful that we spend like about the last hour, that 11:30 to 12:30 time, with those presentations. Maybe it's 11:15 to 12:30. We'll be a little bit flexible, but we'll dedicate at least an hour so that each group has 10 or 15 minutes and maybe more if we can do that, sorting that out. Some will take longer than others. Is that clear? All right. Take the positive mindset.
Sounds good. And just a reminder, I sent everyone those documents too, so they should be in your email.
Yeah, please refer to those documents. That should be both a guide and inspiration. And if you see something that makes sense in your context, it looks like a good outcome that you'd like to grab, you know, it's not stealing, it's value-added repackaging.
Cool. Well, Craig, I'll start these sessions. If there's anything that pops up, feel free to send something to the group and we can
Will do.
respond, or email me directly too.
Yes, and Corey and I will be entering and exiting your groups to sit in on your conversation, give you some support and ideas and gentle guidance. Okay, we'll see you soon. Katie, last word.
And I float too. Do I float with you?
Oh,
and
I'm sorry. Yes,
Corey?
and
What do
Katie.
I do?
Katie is going to do that. I would say that honestly, Katie, you know, given the need for some finance expertise, going back and forth between infrastructure, operational excellence, and maybe a little bit on workforce, but you can choose. I would say stay connected to those that are going to need that financial help.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep, forgot to mention that. Thank you. All right, everyone. See you soon. All right, so let's start with the group that finished first. So I told them individually they were A students. So, you know, they want to have their moment in the sun here. That is our community development group. And I don't know, Melissa or Bill or Sean, who's going to speak on this one?
Since Melissa's got the notes, she should probably lead if that's okay.
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 Melissa, can you share your screen?
Mhm. I don't know why it is not working. Hold on one second. Okay.
There we go.
I
Thanks,
just
Neil.
gave you presenter privileges.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Okay. So Craig, I don't know how you want me to go through.
I think it's just literally going to, so let me set the ground rules for everybody. What we're going to do is each team, and Melissa's first one up, so she'll get to experience this first. Walk through the first outcome and walk through talk about the outcome and the target and then the KOI third. I know it doesn't flow that way, but I'd want the outcome to be stated, how you're going to measure it, and then the KOIs that you'll use. And then we'll pause there. And if anybody has questions or comments, we'll take those questions and comments at that point. Okay?
Okay. So our first one was, I guess we just have vibrant downtown here, but obviously create a vibrant downtown. And we discussed whether or not it would be important to define that downtown. I think some of us have a pretty strong idea of what that is, and maybe others don't, though. Our target would be, we didn't fill in numbers here, but an increased number of housing units and an increased number of businesses between 2023 and 2026. And we would measure that by somehow tallying up the number of new housing units and number of new businesses.
Okay. So let's go with that. Who has any questions or comments about that?
If I could just add a couple additional comments about why we selected that. We kind of started, or at least I started with like Vibrant City, and then again thinking of the time period of this plan of the next few years, given the significance of the hub in everybody's minds, given the progress of growth so far, that it made sense to specifically name building out the vibrancy of downtown as one of these top 3 outcomes.
Okay. Sound good, everybody? I see nodding heads. All right. Keep going, Melissa.
Okay. The next one was an increased tax base. Our target would be to increase the percent total taxable market value of the city between 2023 and 2026. We'd measure that by measuring the change in total taxable market value in the city. And like Sean did in the last one, maybe to fill that out a little bit, we talked about the importance of commercial. We talked about if that's housing, the difficulties in the commercial market right now and our time frame. And so instead of drilling down to a particular thing like commercial development, we just said overall an increased tax base.
Okay. Any questions on that? All right. Keep rolling.
Okay. And then to maintain Richfield as an affordable place to live, we would measure whether or not we'd maintained or increased the number of units affordable to households at 50% AMI or lower. And you know, we'd count those up. We'd have to figure out a way exactly to do that in this short time frame, but that's how we would do it.
Okay. This is very aspirational, and as I mentioned to the group, one of the things that is a truism about this area is that you don't control all the levers for this. The private market obviously does, but you should be measuring yourself on the fact that all the things that you do control and all the opportunities that you have to take, that you check those boxes and you make sure that you're doing that. So this will incent you to have robust conversations about projects and zoning and guidance and mixed use and a bunch of other things that you might have at your disposal, TIF, you know, things at your disposal to make that target happen. Questions? Go ahead, Maria.
I have a question about that. I'm wondering if we lower the AMI percentage or the AMI percentage there, and I guess I have a question with the inclusionary housing policy and then just financing structures. I feel like 50% AMI might be taken care of with some, like more easily with some of those financing structures, but I don't know. And then I'm thinking, does that mean that we try to focus the affordability where there's less of the market ability to influence, so that we double down on the higher affordability? It's a question, open question.
Response?
One thing was thinking about sort of action steps on the city that counteract or mitigate the negative impacts of overall market growth in Richfield. So I don't know that it's necessarily just the rent price of apartments, but also the decreasing affordability of single family homes and other things that as the market is doing those things to push up, we need to be sure that we're not leaving people behind and that we should focus city initiatives on that result. So we did talk a little bit about what AMI to be, and actually I don't know offhand right now if there are many houses in Richfield affordable to 50% AMI. But the idea being that you could say it's, you know, you're focused on 60% AMI or higher, and then you're just, I mean, basically you're just talking about a larger group of people and a broader goal versus a more targeted group. So I think it could go up or down, but to the extent we do want to consider owned housing, I think you would almost completely take that out of the equation if we're only focusing on 30% AMI.
And maybe if I can weigh in, and Sean or Melissa, you tell me if I'm wrong here. I think your intent, Maria, is probably what will actually happen, because I think that's what you were saying. I don't mean to repeat you, Sean, but I think the idea is you're going to try to make a big impact, as big an impact as you can, but because everything seems to be on a fairly steep upward trajectory, just holding at that 50% as an overall is probably indicative of the fact that you're digging in at lower levels. Okay.
I was just going to jump into, this is something I'm really passionate about. And at first, as I was thinking even last night about this, I wondered about 30% AMI. But what I like about this is I think getting 30% AMI with larger units is also nearly impossible. And that I do think there's been a strong push from the community to keep pushing for larger units. And then I also, my question, and it's not like such a high priority that I'm like upset if it falls off the work plan, but would this also then include some of the like missing middle conversation, or is that not still part of this?
Yep. that would include that missing middle. It's, I mean, you know, that's why we kind of set it at this broader level so that we can work on all of those different aspects. And I think that would come out in the work plan. Is that still a priority, or is it more of a priority for us to be putting all of our effort and all of our staff time into tax credit? But as it's written, that would still fall under this.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Good job. Let's give them a hand. Yay. All right. It's not the same when it's not a hand when we're in person, Melissa, but you know, we did give you a hand. All right, thank you for that. Let's move to sustainable infrastructure. Who's going to share their screen on that one?
I probably am the one that has that.
Okay, Chris, can you do that? Make sure that Kristen can share.
Yes.
I think it's allowing me to. So, can you see the one?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so our 3 outcomes. So the first outcome was city infrastructure supports the needs of the community. And we would target that by having an adopted comprehensive asset management plan by a certain date. We just threw in July or end of June next year. And that would, our indicators, is that what I'm supposed to go through?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. It's just the little, all the plans that would feed them. The comprehensive plan would be understanding, you know, the parks inventory, our utilities plan, road plan, building plan, and then to the adherence to timeline means we're making progress and we can actually meet that goal of June 2023.
Okay, so let's pause there. Comments, questions from the group about that? Is that understandable? Makes sense? See some
And that
nodding
we
heads.
expect will be a huge endeavor.
Yeah, gigantic. Yep.
I guess that was my comment. 2023 seemed really aggressive, but
Right, so this is still,
That's a placeholder?
yep, all of ours are placeholders, I'd say. But we did think about it. I mean, all the little plans, I mean, we'd have to hire help, and that might, you know, we can get timelines from consultants on when they think it's realistic to do certain things. So
Yeah.
they gave us a year, basically a little over a year.
Okay.
Does that also include rolling stock?
It should, yeah.
Okay. All right, let's keep moving.
Then the second one was a sustainable infrastructure financing plan, basically, where we have a plan, a funding strategy adopted that would also include operations. We talked about that. So we'd have the little pieces along the way that would fall into place, our utility rate capacity, making sure that the comprehensive strategy fits within the limits that we want to set. We look for external funding options that we could maybe secure. And so we would give ourselves time to develop that once the comprehensive asset management plan was complete.
Okay. Questions or comments about that one? Sort of complementary to the other one, but I see some nodding heads and thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah, and so recognizing this is a lot of work in 3 years, but it's, you know, the right thing to be doing right now. So.
Okay.
And then
Last one.
finally, that climate resilience is a priority within the city. So that would, our target would be to actually complete one of the highest priority projects by the end of this 3-year plan or term. And that would mean that all of the departments understand what's in the action plan and how that impacts them, and that priorities are set within the action plan itself. And then we secure funding for those top projects, whether talking about grant funding may be a realistic option here as well.
Yeah. Okay. Questions about that?
I'd like to hear Ben's perspective. I know this was one you were really focused on, Ben? Does this kind of fit within what you're thinking? We struggled. Initially, we were like, we need to scope out dedicated funding and staff for the sustainability work. But then essentially it translated to like, we need more funding and we need more money. And so this is how we thought about it for the next 3 years. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I guess my reflection on the climate action plan since we passed it is that the timeline we included in it was overly ambitious, especially given one staff person and no funding. My thought would be it might be, and I don't think having just one project in the plan means none of the other projects will happen. But I guess I would maybe add in that whatever projects we deem can't happen yet, that there be some amount of rescheduling, even if that becomes a 10-year plan, that the other projects aren't just like forgotten about for 3 years.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, if I can respond, I think the priorities here may include a timeline then, right? It could.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thanks.
And I can add with timeline if you want, if that's helpful. Craig, I don't know if that's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, the indicators are just, that's what you're tracking. So yeah, we can tweak that too. That's good. Yep. All right. Any
That's
last
it.
comments? Katie?
Yeah, I had a question. If you can go back to utility rate capacity and tax-based capacity, like, can you just give me some, I don't know, more information on that? Like, what kind of indicators are you thinking about?
So the idea behind this is that the outcome is stable infrastructure financing or sustainable infrastructure financing. And the target that says that you have that is, at least for this point, if it was a perfect world, it wouldn't be the adopted comprehensive funding strategy. It would be all infrastructure has dedicated funding and is fully funded for it, its term of existence or something like that. But a comprehensive strategy is what you can do in the near term. How are you going to know whether you're getting that done? So you're looking at things like your utility rate capacity, your tax capacity, the limits of the debt limit that you have, the external funding availability. All of those are indicators of funding capacity that would be tracked or trended to help you understand whether you're going to have sustainable funding for your infrastructure.
Yeah, it would all feed the strategy.
So it's developing the parameters of that, like what we're willing to fund from those things.
Yeah, maybe we need more descriptors about what we're trying to say with the capacity. Like, just because we have technically an unlimited utility rate capacity or a 10 million bonding capacity, is that, or debt limit capacity, should we really be, are we assuming we're going to max that out? No. What's right sizing? How do we right size the capacity and apply that to the comprehensive funding strategy?
I don't want you to overthink the KOIs at this point because you don't know what you don't know about this yet. That part of what you're going to do is exactly what Maria just said. You're going to need to have robust discussions about where do utility rates go? What are you willing to do? What do you need to do? You're going to need to understand in the previous priority, you're going to need to understand conditions and cost parameters and drivers of expense. And then you're going to have to compare that to, what you can legitimately do with rates or what you're willing to do with rates. And do you have a carve out in taxes for utility or for infrastructure? Do you want to even think about that? I mean, all of those are maybes, potentials, what ifs. We're just putting those in there as things that you will track and trend, but the details of how you'll use that, what you'll do, any of that still needs to be determined, and you're gonna work all that out. We'll refine the indicators based on additional discussions that we're gonna have about how you're gonna proceed to do that. An indicator isn't a task. An indicator is just, here's what we're actually looking at. But it needs, this isn't, I will agree that this isn't adequate. It's just kind of the kitchen sink of stuff right now based on this limited effort today.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. All right, let's give them a hand. That was good work. That was hard work. All right, the next up is equity and inclusion. Who was the scribe on that one?
I believe I am now the scribe.
Okay. So you get to empower yourself to share.
All right. So one note we did, I was in and out of the meeting, so we took some notes. This is not a complete summary of what we have. I was going to rely on Ben and Neil to throw a little bit more into this document too as we discuss. But this is kind of what we identified initially as the outcomes that are important to us. So Ben, Neil, do you have anything to add for this first one to
Can you
start?
zoom in, Chris? It's quite small.
Yes. How's that look for everyone?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so the first outcome, this is a big one, and so we debated what verb to use, but decided on address racial disparities in the community. That the target, we actually had two, but yes, the first one was like deciding and figuring out a process to track certain racial disparities that different departments may have multiple or one or whatever, but figuring out what those are, how do we track them? And then the second would be that the relevant departments for each of these would, by the end of the 3-year period, come up with a plan to address them and reduce them. We initially had reduce, decided that there's certainly some departments and some measures that we are already measuring and working on, but other places we don't even have the data yet.
Let me ask a question of Ben or the group. How would you describe the outcome as if it had happened? So address means we're going to do it, but what would it mean? Racial disparities reduced in the community, or racial disparities, I'm looking at it as how do I describe the outcome as if it's happened? What's the after condition description of that?
I mean, we started with reduce, and I think that's still obviously the goal. It's just the question of how, in some places we're already working at that, and in other places we're not even tracking the data yet.
So I would say aspirationally then, the way to describe this outcome would be racial disparities reduced in the community.
Well, so Craig, I think the one thing why we settled on address is that it's kind of a working word. So we're addressing racial disparities by using the first year to evaluate and sort of pull data. And then because it's still addressed, now we can look at like what are the next steps to, reduce the racial disparities within the areas, or also maybe there's spots where we don't want to like increase it, but like, increase access to affordability. Like, I think we felt that word would allow us a little bit more play in this area.
So
I agree with Chris. We needed that flexibility in this outcome just because where, as Ben said, every department unit is in a different place.
Yeah.
And in many cases, we need the data before we can even go about addressing.
Right, but I'm only going to push back to just try to stay consistent with what we're doing. You want the outcome to be an aspirational end state. So racial disparity reduction in the community is the outcome you're seeking. And so I think it should be stated that way. you can still have a target that is more about the realism of what you can accomplish in the 3-year period. So I'm splitting hairs here, maybe, but the idea is we always want the outcomes to be that aspirational end state, and then let's put the reality of what we can do in the next 3 years into the target that supports that outcome.
So can we go back to reduce racial disparities in the community?
Or reduce, I'd like the word reduced, or racial disparities reduced in the community, something like that. I want that, to be a, it's happened kind of a statement.
Like that racial disparities are minimized or something. They are
Yeah.
something.
Reduced, yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, that we are looking for a description of the outcome.
What has happened.
Not the verb. Yes, got it.
Right.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ben, and then I wanted to add just a couple things too.
No, sorry, I was going to move on to the next one. We didn't stop for questions.
Okay, just a couple things on that one. So this is a little bit of word stuff, but it does matter. So I would put racial inequity versus a disparity, because you can have disparities that are by age or whatever it is, and they're not necessarily inequities. So I think we're talking about racial inequities maybe. And then in terms of the target, does it make sense, Craig, to be more clear? Because what happens a lot with this work on reducing inequities is that we're using measures that we can't actually move ourselves because they're much bigger and broader. So right. I think for the target, I would like to see it be something around what we have power and control over within our service delivery. So maybe the goal is we see the reduction in inequities at the community level, but then the target within the scope of what we can, within our core services and what we do is we're making sure that we're identifying and then reducing in our service delivery. Maybe, I don't know if that tracks with folks.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yep. I think that makes total sense. And in this particular case, well, let me ask you, Maria. I like the idea of limiting it personally to what's within our scope of what we do and hold ourselves accountable. But is there a role, or do you want a role and or target that has something to do with the broader community generally in terms of how are you an actor in influencing, guiding, spotlighting those things, and is there something that you want to communicate to the community about that is somehow translated here?
Yep, I would say yes. And the one that I'm thinking of as an awesome example is we found that we have possibly the largest racial inequity in home ownership in Minnesota. Regardless, we have a big one, and a lot of other communities do too. We then created the first-time home buyers down payment assistance program directly in response to that. And I think staff said 90% or 80, and Melissa probably knows the exact number, of our loans are going to BIPOC families and folks. And so that's kind of how I see it. But I just don't want us to try to be accountable for something that we can only contribute to and not completely influence either.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you.
Some of because we were, as we discussed this, wondering do we need to focus in on certain metrics? And the example I thought of that disparities in graduation rates is absolutely a nationwide issue, but that our local school district was able to take action on that. And similarly, I think, because we were also trying to distinguish this from the next outcome that is more focused on direct service delivery. But in this one, we've talked about public health. We just had the public health data about asthma and mold in housing. That's something that is absolutely a nationwide issue, but that we could have a local impact on. And so I don't want to tailor this too much toward things that are entirely within our control. And
Yep, I think we're on the same page. I am agreeing with that.
Okay.
Are
Let's
we ready?
move to the next. Let's move to the next one.
So this one was increased cultural competency in city services. That the target would be, and specifically that BIPOC and historically marginalized community members report higher customer satisfaction by a certain percent. Building on the community survey results we got that were pretty alarming, and then KOI would have to be figuring out a process to track that more consistently. But that in this case, we thought about, do we want to increase the number of bilingual things? Do we want to increase programs that are targeted to certain communities? And that ultimately felt the qualitative self-report from folks would be the most important metric.
Okay, so on this one, same as before, and I see Chris, that I think it's Chris, you're making those changes. I would just say increased cultural competency in city services. And then my question to whoever has the subject matter expertise here, I think the target having increasing satisfaction is probably one way to do that. But I think it also, is there a metric that we can point to and or build that measures cultural competency in operations? Is there something that anybody can help me with there that because to me, if we say the outcome is increased cultural competency in city services, what does that mean and how would I know it if it happened, right? That's where I'm going with that. And we should hold ourselves accountable for that if that's the outcome. And if we don't know yet, we can do a placeholder for that right now and work to develop that. But I think that's the more relevant A plus B kind of thing. If we're shooting for cultural competency in city services, then we need to have something measurable that reflects the fact that we have achieved or we're on the road to cultural competency in our city services.
It's a really good point, Craig. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Just increased number of BIPOC users of city services.
Okay, let's go to the target. And I think Corey was just mentioning to me, it may be increased ratings on customer satisfaction as opposed to community satisfaction. Yeah, it's the people who are using the services. So that's why it was customer versus community. Because it relates to services.
It's working backwards a little bit, but I guess I'm curious from the rest of council, maybe the outcome we're hoping for is more external, and rather than increased cultural competency is like increased, maybe the outcome is increased customer satisfaction and access to BIPOC and marginalized communities.
So let me ask a clarifying question. Is this would an indicator here, or would cultural competency in city services mean that we understand the religious objection to something that we've done more clearly, that we understand the confusion that someone would have if we are incorrectly communicating in their native language to them? Is that the kinds of things that we're talking about here, or that we failed to deploy a form in a native language to someone who's a target audience of that service? What are we talking about here? Are those the kinds of things, or am I off base on that?
Well, I'm saying just from a communication standpoint and an engagement standpoint, I would say that probably any and all of the above. I know that's probably too broad, but I'm just saying, like, it's there's lots of areas for improvement in those areas, and that's, I think, what we'd be focusing on.
Yeah, so I think the things that you want to measure then are things that are deployed and experiences, as in satisfaction or feedback that you get from the recipients, right? So it's two things. It's I'm measuring the number of things I'm doing to change and improve and enhance my competency and deployment, and I'm also improving the satisfaction and feedback I'm getting from the recipients of the services I'm delivered if they are in those target audiences, right? So I think that's where we need to be. So there's probably a placeholder there, Chris, that you want to put in the target that has something to do with, cultural competency measurement, and you can just put that in there for now. But I think we need to have a metric for that. Okay. All right. Any other comments? I think this has been very helpful. At least certainly to me, it has. All right, let's keep rolling.
And two, I saw the question in the chat. Thank you, Mary. We did discuss that we don't have people with disabilities named. I think both the second and third outcome would be beyond just racial equity dynamics, but other marginalized groups. So this third one then also includes, I guess, implemented equity-based decision-making framework. That the two targets would be, one of which is already well underway, but that the equity toolkit is integrated into staff decision-making processes. And then the second piece would be that council decisions are made with an equity lens, and that the ways to measure that would be basically like some sort of check-in with probably in supervisor meetings, are staff using the equity toolkit regularly? And then just we talked about this is definitely getting into the like implementation, but like if the council version is that staff reports have equity considerations, or whatever the avenue is, the measurement is basically just, is it happening?
I think you could go one step further, because we could use, we could have a line for council and a toolkit for staff, but then we might not be making changes based on those. So I don't know if we can say there's use and, I don't know how we'd track like, we're making more equitable decisions, because you could have something and use it, or a report, or have the findings, but we're not applying them per se. I don't know if we can take it one step further.
Like the outcome would be equity-based decision-making framework.
Yeah, like we see an increase. Yeah.
Yeah, here's where I go with that one. So if you limit your outcome to an implemented equity-based decision-making framework, all I have to do is say, yep, check the box, put the framework in place. But if nothing changes, nothing, as Maria says, nothing changes. So the outcome you're seeking is to move the needle on equity and inclusion, right? Or something like that. And so I think you're on the right track. I just think that the target needs to reflect movement or accomplishment of some sort of equity-based thing, right? Or something that would help us understand that we've moved the needle in terms of a more equitable environment, or a decision-making that was equity informed. And I'm struggling to figure that out, but I think that's the right. I mean, you characterize it correctly, Maria. That's what you want.
And also, like, I feel like our staff have been doing equity focused decision making in so many ways, and I feel like I would love to like rewrite that history too, because I think that there's a lot of ways we've been doing it, but we haven't maybe been thinking about it that way, or we, you know, we're just very understated too. But we've made a lot of equity changes, and I think it's baked in a lot of times. So I want to celebrate what we have been doing here as well, but somehow, like, you know, that the outcome results in, yeah, we can figure that out, the wording, but
Yeah, I would want to, I made some notes here. I think if everybody's comfortable with this, I think where Maria's going, or the idea behind this is, you've done some of the work, and if we can tweak this and try to find a way of showing a metric that says equity has been improved, or equity somehow has changed, that you've made a real world impact, that would be the desirable target, right? And
Yeah, and
so
I think, and I can't speak for everyone, but I think that the overarching sentiment is understood for this one.
yeah, I think we got it. Okay.
It just comes down to the, as you said, kind of reworking everything together to
rework that. Yeah, we can
polished
make
up.
that. Yeah, we can polish that up. All right, let's give these folks a hand. That was great work. Yeah. All right. We are careening, stumbling towards the finish. We're getting close. All right. Let's try workforce capacity next.
All right, I will share here. Okay. So workforce capacity, and my group members, feel free to jump in if I miss anything. First outcome that we have is that staff workforce, boards, and commissions equitably reflect the diversity of the community. So the targets that we have measured for that are percentage increases in BIPOC leadership within the city, employees in the city in the next 3 years, and then also BIPOC commissioners. And the key indicator for that is a percentage increase of racial diversity of staff, boards, and commissions. And we started out with just racial diversity because that's the easiest for us to measure right now, understanding that that may change in the future.
And the only amendment I would make to that is the staff is over the next 3 years. I'd probably put the other two over the next 3 years as well. So these are 3-year targets for all of this. Maria?
another addition. I think this is true in Richfield, and it's true in a lot of organizations. It has to go past the increase, but there has to be retention of folks of color, because I see it on the boards and commissions and staff. But across all organizations, you can hire BIPOC folks, but if you don't have a welcoming environment, they're in and out like crazy. And so I don't know if there's a way to speak to that retention
Let me ask you specifically, Maria, since you raised this, because I think that's a good point. Would a legitimate measure for that be that the turnover rate for BIPOC be no greater than the turnover rate of the overall? So in other words, you're going to have a certain turnover rate in any organization, but you don't want to see the BIPOC turnover rate be any greater than that. It's equal to or less than that?
That would be good.
That'd be okay? Okay.
Yeah, and I think we also addressed some of that, maybe not specific to BIPOC staff, in our next outcome. So it could either go here or even in the next outcome is potential measurement.
Okay.
Can you define leadership? Do you mean the director team?
Yeah, so we struggle with that because we said that we would like to measure it really at all levels of leadership within the city. So we have the ability to drill it down to supervisor, manager, director, all the way up to the executive level. So we'd like to really look at it holistically first, and then we can drill down the data to even just specific roles within the city.
Okay. All right, Krista, go ahead.
All right, so next outcome is staff capacity to meet the demands of the community. And here we really struggled because we have a lot that we wanted to cover. So you'll see that we've listed some italicized ideas for how we can continue to put this into play on a day-to-day basis. But really, right now, the most critical need is filling all the vacancies that we have within the city for all the budgeted positions that we have. So the target would be achieving 100% fully staffed across our city positions 90% of the time by the year 2024. So hopefully by that time, we have most of our vacancies filled. We're closer to that operational capacity to meet the demands of the community. And part of that also includes increasing our staff retention from, whatever percentage to whatever percentage, probably over the same number of years.
So let me weigh in here and just say to the full group that I was debating this with the team, and they made a good clarification to me. I know that maybe the number one thing we talked about yesterday was hair on fire, too many changes, so much work, not enough staff, all those kinds of things. And I kept approaching this from the standpoint of we need more staff, we need more people, we need more whatever. And the group pointed out, and Krista particularly said, look, we have a lot of vacancies too. So, we're not even fully up to our authorized strength. The first focus ought to be, let's get to authorized strength, and then let's decide what we need after we experience that, because there could be lots of ripple effects of being fully, being to a full authorized strength. And I was persuaded that made a lot of sense. So I just wanted to clarify that in case anyone had that question. I think in terms of the KOI there too, it says fill vacancies within reasonable time frame. I would just shorten that to time to fill is the thing you're monitoring or measuring.
Okay.
And I just say staff turnover rate is the other one.
Can I ask a fundamental question? Because maybe I made the wrong assumption. So because we're doing this now, and it will be part of the budget process, so we can fund some of these initiatives. I'm thinking of this as more of a 2023, 2024, 2025 plan.
Yes.
That...
Yes. I would, it's your choice. You can call it any 3 years you want. You could say 2022, 2025. I'm kind of thinking it's 2023, 2026, because it corresponds to, you'll probably get off the ground later this year, or maybe next budget year is probably the better way of characterizing. So that's your choice, but you're right. It's probably 2023. Okay, Krista, keep going.
All right. So last outcome is healthy relationships amongst elected and appointed officials and staff. And the target is to improve trust and relationship index from a survey that we don't have yet, but that's going to be one of the key indicators from a certain percentage through the years 2023 to 2026. So I don't know if my group members want to jump in here and add any other additional information, but we really were looking at how do we increase employee and elected official engagement and communication.
Craig really helped when this was an outcome that we struggled with, trying to find what the target was, what the indicators would be, knowing that it would be qualitative instead of quantitative data. So Craig helped in the process of just formulating the target and also looking at what the indicator would be.
Yeah, the idea behind this is that if you want, it's hard to quantify relationships and trust and all of those sorts of things, but in reality, you need to ask the participants, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like I've got a good relationship? Do you feel like it's improving? Do you trust this person? And so what I was saying is you could build a very simple, let's say it's a 5-question survey that's an index that you deploy shortly from now, in the early year. And then every year you go back and you see what the change has been. The idea would be if I'm at, a very low number, this is going to incentivize you to do whatever you need to do to build those relationships, to create engagement, to build trust, or whatever it is you're attempting to do within the context of these healthy relationships here.
Can
Make
you
sense?
tell me,
Go ahead.
is staff, are you talking about the entire workforce of the city or the leadership team, or how broadly are you defining staff?
I think when we were talking about it, primarily we had in mind executive staff and in council, and to a secondary extent, commissions. But is that your feelings too, Zach and Krista?
I think initially, yes, because we talked about how much management or the executive relationship with the council affects the rest of the staff, and how that affects the commissions. But I think, later down the road, we'd be drilling down to that finite part of it. But initially, I think it's, it all starts from, the policies directed by the council, with the relationship with Katie, and Katie going to the executive team, and then going down from there.
Yeah, I agree.
I have a question. So I don't know if it's related to this third one or if it's how it's fitting, but one thing that I see, we're going through generational changes across the country. There's all these shifts happening. So all this stuff is affecting us, in addition to all the Richfield specific things. And part of that is, I feel like that building up our culture, and it is part of all of this. And if you build a strong culture and a cultural identity that makes you the employer of choice, I feel like the relationship and the roles and how you work together is a part of that culture between the elected officials and the staff. But maybe that's too big of a thing. I just keep thinking about, like, we had a very strong culture, and that got disrupted in so many different ways and on so many different levels. And I feel like to rebuild that as a strong foundation, I don't know. I'm just thinking about how that might fit in this one or not.
Reactions to that? Thoughts about that?
I was just going to add that I've heard, and this is almost entirely internal, so I trust staff's judgment on it, but I've heard a lot about like team morale and just like staff interactions within the staff team. And so I guess I would hope that and it seems to fit with this, that this isn't just about, council and directors is very important, but that this also could include some of the work that has been happening and should continue to keep supporting the broader staff team amongst themselves.
Good point.
I'm thinking to respond to your comment, Maria, if you want to think about it this way, and I don't, again, I'm trying not to lead you in any direction, but I think some of what you're talking about will be accommodated if you focus on this outcome. So here's what I mean by that. If you start with the idea that the leaders of the organization, and I say the council and the executive staff first, and then tangentially your boards and commissions, but let's say council and staff, executive staff first. If you get your healthy culture established, and it's the model for what you want, and it starts to permeate your interactions, and other people see that, and it's carried forward by the department heads into the organization, I think that builds a strong foundation. You're the model for initiating that cultural change that you want to see. And I think it regardless of whether you threw this all away and said, we just want to build a new organizational culture, it would still have to start with the leadership team getting on the same page and saying, we want to build a healthy culture. So I think this could be sort of the start of that. And if you find ways forward to model that, it's probably helpful in achieving what you seek.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I might say the annual survey results, I don't know if we can somehow update that, because we've done like multiple annual
Yeah.
surveys and like reviews of Katie and all these things. And I don't see a lot of our trust being built or changing too much. You know, we're doing a ton of things like that, but I don't see the needle moving.
I think the specifics about this would be the trust index survey. So that's related very specifically to this application, but I take your point. Yeah.
So we are doing that OD work with the staff team. I actually just in the last week or so think that, you know, we're going to do a train the trainer, because we're doing it. We've done it with our director team, and we plan to do managers and supervisors next, and then we're going to do train the trainer, so that the trainers are doing it with each division. So it's going to be all staff to get to that, you know, Maria's point of the organizational culture has changed, and we want to be very intentional about creating a healthy culture. But I actually think that having a trainer come out and do it with the council as well, maybe me and the council, maybe leadership team and the council, I think that would be really helpful.
Right.
But that's an initiative.
Right. And I think those are all really logical next steps if you've identified this as a good outcome, and it sounds like everybody's in agreement with it. So, okay, let's give them a hand. That was a good, strong effort on the part of this group. Thank you very much. All right, next up, last one up, operational excellence.
Mike has the document to share, or Jay does, I guess. So I just want to point out, we started out thinking that finance was going to be embedded in all of our outcomes, and then we switched mid-course to have it as a specific one, so we don't have quite as much detail as some of the rest of you. So does someone want to take it away, or?
I think you can. Do you want to do it, Mary?
Sure. So we talked about the need for long-term planning, but also the ability to pivot if like a great idea comes up or a crisis happens. So our outcome is we want community leadership that's adaptable and focused. So we want to make sure we stick to our priorities and stick to our mission focus, so that like there's like a certain percentage of the strategic plan targets are hit.
It should be achieved, yeah.
Achieved,
right.
but if like one of the commissions comes up with a great initiative or some unusual thing happens like the pandemic and we have to do a quick pivot, we need to have a way to do that as well. So we want to have long-term planning, but we want to make sure that it's adaptable and stuff isn't like locked out for 3 years and you can't talk about it till the next strategic plan.
Right. Good KOI there could be targets achieved or something like that too. So yeah, that's good. Okay. Any questions about that one? Let me just pause real quickly. Anybody have any questions? That sound? The later in the day you get, the fewer the questions. And so
I'll just add to that a little bit because I've talked to lots of folks about it. It's again, I'm going to an initiative, but it's making sure that you have good processes and outcomes for your work plans.
Yep.
Are there, I heard staff bring up, certainly in finance, the need for a 10-year plan. Are there other places where we need longer than a 3-year plan where that's not already happening?
I think the short term or the quick answer to that is we talked about that in one of the other ones. So that asset management plan and the financing plans, those are all longer than the 3 years, and you've got a comp plan. So there are other interlinked plans that either exist or are going to be developed. So yeah, I think the short answer is yes.
And our third outcome has to do with one of those because it's about the IT situation and the long-term plan for technology.
Okay. All right, keep rolling.
All right, then the next one is where we ended up trying to specifically call out the financial part of it. So we need the operational capacity to deliver the essential services. And so we had a discussion is we want to be able to have stabilized funding so that we can deliver our essential service, but also do continuous improvement, because we want to have that continuous improvement. But you've got to have, and you don't want to have like rise and fall of funding and chaos. We want to have things stable so that we can do that long-term plan. So we're looking for stable funding for those core services being in place. And we had a long discussion about whether that should be with tax rates or whatever the method is. And so that kind of got in the weeds, and I won't go there. But we need to figure out a way to do this stable funding for the core services. And then each department is going to come up with some kind of process improvement initiative that they're going to be working on so that we keep moving forward.
Okay. Questions about that? Go ahead, Maria.
All right. I feel like I'm talking a lot now. I feel like this is very similar or could be redundant with the one that we did in the, I'm already forgetting the focus, the sustainable
Infrastructure.
infrastructure.
And we talked a little bit about that, I think, too. I think the difference here is it's truly operational. Now, not that infrastructure doesn't bleed into operations to a certain extent, but that's really more about capital things, and this is more about staff and delivery things.
Yeah, this is your operating budget, and the infrastructure is more focused on your capital budget. I mean, they definitely are related, and they're definitely putting stress on each other. So, yeah, I mean, if
Yep.
you had your only a finance outcome, then I think you could have both in them, but that's not the direction we went.
Yep.
So like an example is the co-responder model in the police department. If we haven't stabilized our funding, we're not going to be able to add people to do co-responding.
Yep. Okay. Let's go to the next one, last one.
All right, and then we heard loud and clear that we need to have a plan for technology. So we had been really specific, and people said like we need to get Windows or Microsoft 365, whatever it is. So if we have that platform, then we can start planning out the other things. But then after the conversation, we decided we needed to be even more basic to that. We need to figure out what operating system we need, what the needs are in each of the departments, so that we can meet all of those service requirements. And so there's like no plan right now. It's just kind of a hodgepodge from what I understand. And so, all right, and
Yeah.
the 365 is important. Yeah.
Let me take it from here, Mary. We struggled here, but I think it was a good struggle. It was very clear that there's a strong need for technology. You need upgraded technology sufficient to deliver your service requirements or to meet your service requirements. When we tried to figure out how would we measure that success or some kind of movement on that, we just got we got all bound up in this. And so the placeholder is we're going to implement something by some date. And the idea is that we're going to have additional offline discussions to try to get around that. But I can imagine, and I think Katie imagines this too, that a lot of different initiatives around technology assessments, prioritization of need, corresponding to across the board deployment of things. What is that? How do you prioritize it? How do you pay for it? All of that needs to happen. And so in this performance period, those things will occur. It's just that we need a little bit more time to get real clarity about what that targeted measure is and the things that we're going to track. So the group's begging a little indulgence on this, and I think they probably need it. But this one it's clear that lots of things are going to have to be done here.
And I did tell Katie that's going to be on week 6 of my employment.
Yeah,
Other
that
questions?
was, the
Yeah.
timeliness was the big concern, is that we want it needs to like be a high priority. It can't be something that waits for another 3 years.
Yep. Yep. Any other questions or comments about that?
Can I just ask a question on the previous one of the group? Because I joined and I was very focused on finance because I'm trying to wear two hats right now. But originally when I had joined, they had talked about not just process improvement and continuous improvement, but also innovation. And I just want to make sure that the wording on this captures that original idea of, you know, that the departments can continue to innovate. So Mike and Jay and Mary, do you feel like that got captured here with process improvement or not?
I think it's my fault that they took innovation off, just to be clear. So I don't think it was them. But I'll let them respond before I weigh in anymore.
No, we had that on there, and then after talking with you, Craig, we removed it. So that was in there.
And part of the reason that it was pulled out was if we don't have the stable funding for core services, you can't innovate. And we did have some of that conversation. So yes, each of us is trying to be innovative and try to find ways of managing what we have. But without a stable funding source, it's really not practical to start thinking about what else can we do.
So I think the split the baby idea here, to use a strange analogy, I guess, is that process improvement ought to be part of everybody's management approach, and that would include, you know, some amount of innovation, but it's clearly about how do we stay efficient and effective and keep doing things better. And so that's an accommodation of that. You know, that's still a good management practice. It may be that I'm not spending lots of extra time figuring out new and innovative ways of doing 100 new things, but it's how do I keep doing what I'm doing even better, and how am I measuring that, and how are we doing continuous improvement? Does that help, Katie?
I think so. I just wanted to make sure that the original group was okay with the changes.
Okay. All right, I think we're good. Let's give this group a hand. Fantastic. And we are a little over time. Let me just tell you that, oops, I'm in the wrong PowerPoint presentation. That doesn't help you at all. So where we go from here is, I'll show you in a second. I'll be coming back and meeting, Corey and I will be coming back, not just me. Corey and I will be coming back and meeting with your executive team. And the whole idea behind this, just to make it clear, is that whole list of things on the left hand or the right hand side of the screen, the strategic initiatives. There's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 8 initiatives in each of those priority areas. These are the things that are necessary to successfully address each of those targeted outcomes. A little bit of what we're going to be doing at that session as well, though, is cleaning up and adjusting and wordsmithing some of what we did today, just to make sure that it's in good shape. These initiatives will cover the multi-year planning period. Now, some initiatives might be a 90-day initiative. Some will be a full 3-year initiative and maybe even transition beyond. But they will tell you the what, when, where, and how. You'll be able to see the initiatives here. These are the items, but beyond each of those items together will have an action plan associated with it. So let's say you have priorities, and you've got, let's say, 4 initiatives in each one. So now you have 20 initiatives that are being pursued to achieve those 15 targeted outcomes. Each of those 20 initiatives has one of these action plans that's on the screen in front of you. So there's a lot going on here, and essentially, I either get one of 2 reactions from staff. No, they have a look of pure terror, or their eyes have rolled into the backs of their heads. But that we have to keep in mind that this is a 3-year period, and that much of what you're talking about in terms of action is ongoing and is tangential, if not even part of what you're doing now. This is just focusing some of that and achieving that. It'll be, some of it may not get done because you don't have enough money to do it, just quite frankly. You know, this is, as Katie pointed out, you'll be using your strategic plan to help in budget decisions. So it may be that things get moved one way or the other, or don't get funded, but the aspiration is that this is what you're going to have as a guidance system for the next 3 years. So with that, I just want to say that you know, you've all been extraordinarily dedicated, and you've worked very hard to come up with a document that I think reflects well on the priorities that you have. And I want to thank you for that. Ben?
Yeah, sorry, quick question. Can we get council get the versions we had today? I really appreciate that staff is going to wordsmith and make them nice.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But just so we don't forget the ideas we had today. Great, thanks.
No, we'll send you out some progress notes, and then we'll take that stuff back and keep working on the polishing. All right. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the fact that everybody dug in, worked hard, followed my lead, took my criticism and comments with good humor. That's always important. But again, I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.